period. We have 5 speakers here that would like to comment, and the first speaker is Mr. John Gergely. Did I say that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thanks, John. I'll stick with John. Thank you.
My name is John Gergely. I'm a resident of Newport News. I'm Mayor Price's and Delegate Yancey's constituent. What I'm here about, I haven't spoken to this group before. That's kind of a nice touch, I think. But what I'm here about is I do not think that this group has legal standing to spend Hampton Roads Transportation Fund money on the third crossing or its silly younger son, the Patriots Crossing. And I'm going to read out of Virginia Code, Title 31.3, which is, by the way, in your guidebook here. It clearly states that the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission, that's you guys, shall give priority to those projects that are expected to provide the greatest impact to reducing congestion for the greatest number of citizens residing within Planning District 23. That's your constituents. And shall ensure the money shall be used for such construction projects. Now, that statement's pretty clear. You cannot spend those funds on projects that only minimize reducing congestion. You've got to spend them on projects that have the greatest impact to reducing congestion. That's no ifs, ands, and buts. That's what it says. Now, every study that's ever been performed since the latter years of the last century have shown that the third crossing and now recently Patriots Crossing. I thought these guys spent a lot of time fixing this up. It's not working. That showed that they will not reduce congestion. I have copies of all these studies, and I'd be glad to sit down with any of your staff and show you. But the governing study, the prioritization study of 2010, clearly showed, and here it was an exhaustive study that the HRTPO staff performed. And this is the input data. This was a very exhaustive study. It clearly showed that the best way to solve congestion problems across Hampton Roads, across the crossing, was to add capacity to Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. It did show that building third crossing would not do the job. And back in as recently as March of 2013, Dr. Rothenberg gave a very nice presentation, and it's on the internet. It's just the Hampton Roads crossings. It clearly shows that. Every study's ever been done shows that the third crossing and Patriots Crossing will not reduce congestion in this area. Now, I don't know no matter how much data is tortured or changed or manipulated, that fact will remain. And even the recent public opinion polls that were completed show that the public, your constituents, believe that. So I think you people need to reevaluate what you're doing, because I do not think that you have legal standing to spend any of my regional tax money on the third crossing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Frank Papson.
Good morning, people. Glad to see everybody is smiling. I hope you're doing that when I leave. I have a couple of things that I want to bring out. Number one of your things that you're going to be doing today is you're going to be picking a bank in order to represent you people. And what I'd like to do is, I didn't want to be so loud. One of the things I didn't want to do is bring up the fact that the majority of you people have a conflict of interest in the fact that you are directors of Town Bank. But that's, I don't really care what bank handles the job. But the other thing I want to bring up has to do with where this money is going. I am a firm supporter of the ports of Virginia. They are a tremendous economical engine, providing jobs for both people working at the ports and for people that live and work outside of the ports that are supported by the money that the ports generate. I understand there's a conflict going on right now where people are saying the ports are losing millions of dollars. but the economy the ports generates is talked about in billions of dollars. So your ports are more important than a few dollars. Right now, there's a certain amount of money being taken from the highway fund brought to the ports every year. It's a supplement to the ports. It's money being put into the ports. Now we have this Hampton Roads Tax Association. You people have turned around and decided to impose a tax on the local residents for their local highways and byways. And all of a sudden, all I see here is everything to do with the ports. Isn't it bad enough that we turn around and have the ports supplemented by our highway funds to do what they need to do? And there's no problem with that. My problem is all of the projects that are on this list, all are for the benefit of the ports. The ports are already getting tax money out of our transportation funds. So why are you taking more transportation funds to pay for the benefit of the ports? You are not, and I'll repeat that, you are not helping the congestion in the cities around this area. Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel is a bottleneck, and it will continue to be a bottleneck until something is done. It may mean that you have to build a bridge there. I don't know. You are talking about the third crossing being a means of reducing traffic around the ports, around Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. But in the long run, it's there. People commute back and forth. They like to go the shortest distance. The shortest distance is the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. The third crossing turns around and dumps thousands of cars on 64 on the other side of the Hampton Bridge Tunnel, which only leads to their congestion and their problems. I firmly believe we need to widen 64. We need to widen it going to Richmond, and we needed to widen it all the way to going down 58. I think we need 460 just to move the cargo out of our ports. The bigger the ports get, the more economy is generated, the more jobs we have, the better our economy. But don't expect the taxpayers in this area to be footing the bills for all of these problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Benny. Diana Howard.
Can you hear me? Okay. Two speakers before me said a lot of what I was going to say, but one of the things that was lauded about this commission was that you would be closest to the people. But you were all not elected to this body. You were elected to represent your cities or your counties. And when you raised our taxes, when the General Assembly raised our taxes last year to give us money so that we can address the transportation in our area here in Hampton Roads, that was supposed to give us control over that money for us, not for the state. And now we are going to be doing a third crossing that benefits the port, and the port is a state asset. So now that money is like the majority of the money that is going to be coming to our area from what we are spending in our taxes. And we want the congestion here addressed in Hampton Roads. And TPO put out a survey about the congestion in this area, and 150% of the people who responded said it was the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. Now, I've lived here for many years. I'm not from here originally. I came here with the Navy, and I worked at the Navy base, the NOB, for 6 years. So I know the traffic going back there. My ship was over in the Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Portsmouth, so going through the tunnel. I know all about traffic going back and forth there. I worked in Newport News for a year, and I'm a big fan of the historic triangle in Williamsburg, so I know all about the traffic going back and forth through the Hampton Roads Bridge tunnels. So all I'm saying is the port being a state asset, the majority of the funding for the third crossing should be coming from the state, not from the extra taxes that are levied on Hampton roads. That money is supposed to be for us to address our congestion problem. And I'm also on the Citizens Transportation Advisory Commission, and they gave us information on the most congested areas. Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, #1. The most crash zones, #1 and #2. Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel coming, from Hampton to Norfolk, going from Norfolk to Hampton, right? So I put this information, the top 5 crash zones, the top 5 congested, and the top that were in Virginia Beach, because that's where I live, in Virginia Beach, of each of those. And I sent it out to all of the civic leagues in Virginia Beach. And nobody has come back and said, yeah, we need that third crossing, because I asked them, I said, what's your transportation issue? None of them said the third crossing. So that is what I think we need to address. We're going to be a government for our local region here, then let's address the citizens who pay the taxes. Let's address their problems in traffic. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. I apologize to all those for being late today. The next speaker is on his side, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Donna Sy, and I'm from Portsmouth. Principle of Liberty 14. Life and liberty are secure only so long as the right of property is secure. Under English common law, a most unique significance was attached to the unalienable right of possession, developing, and disposing of property. Land and the products of the earth were considered a gift of God, which was to be cultivated, beautified, and brought under dominion. John Locke pointed out that the human family originally received the planet Earth as a common gift, and that mankind was given the capacity and responsibility to improve it. God, who had given the world to men in common, had also given them reason to make use of it to the best advantage of life and convenience. Another interesting point made by Locke is the fact that all property is an extension of a person's life, energy, and ingenuity. Therefore, to destroy or confiscate such property is, in reality, an attack on the essence of life itself. Though the earth and all inferior creatures are common as a gift from God to all men, yet every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has any right to but himself. The labor of his body and the work of his hand, we may say, are properly his. John Adams saw private property as the most important single foundation stone undergirding human liberty and human happiness. He said, "The moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence. Property must be secured or liberty cannot exist. The moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence. Property must be secured or liberty cannot exist." The General Assembly has admitted that property is not as sacred as the laws of God. The legislators, mostly lawyers, have created a state of anarchy and tyranny by passing the law Senate Bill 513 and House Bill 1253, the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission. This commission is a force to exercise its coercive taxing power to take our property, our conscience, and our free will. In reality, to attack the essence of whom we are, Virginians. The General Assembly tricked the people last year by increasing the state taxes and the gasoline tax to create Hampton Roads Transportation Fund. The fund was created to pay for necessary infrastructure projects such as highway, bridges, and tunnels for Planning District 23. The General Assembly action created its own communist manifesto to coerce the people to give up their right for the sake of common good. But the common good is a trick. The trick is to give the commissioners all the control to line their pockets with the taxpayers' hard-earned money. The General Assembly has created an elite group of politicians, bureaucrats, judges, and lawyers to obtain taxpayers' money. All this regional planning is to dominate and control for money. Control's real name is bondage. Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission is enslaving the people by another layer of government to divert millions of our tax dollars every year to pay for numerous and duplicate personnel and administrative costs rather than necessary road projects. This is a part of the Communist Manifesto too. Government control of labor. The General Assembly has refused to agree to laws necessary for the public good. The legislators continue to tax us without representation, and they allow non-elected officials to tax us. It's a shame we no longer have checks and balances to prevent the abuse of power. P.S. I would like to be appointed to the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission Finance Committee. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for your time, appreciate you. Next speaker is Mark Hidalgo-Yachowski, please. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, honorable members of the Commission, and fellow citizens. This is the season during which my locality of Portsmouth puts together its legislative packets for state and federal dockets. And so I'm assuming that in neighboring localities, you all are doing the same. I want to submit for your consideration requests from each locality that would modify the constitution of this board. That is to say, not the document, the founding document, but the way it's assembled, so that there are directly elected representatives from every locality to act as the decision-making body for this organization. Not mayors, not chairs, because mayors and chairs are elected for different reasons. The job of mayor, the job of chair of the Board of Supervisors is a more generalized sort of position. And this position is important enough that it should have people who are focused on this purpose exclusively. I believe the General Assembly erred in the way it put this commission together. They took the easy route. They took identifiable elected officials from the localities and then seated themselves, 5 of them, on this board. It's interesting that in each body they had to vote to suspend the rules to place themselves on this board. And the poster child for the major problem with that approach is Delegate Jones, who at last meeting essentially told the rest of you that whatever you decided on a particular issue was irrelevant because he would take it back to the General Assembly to do it the way he saw fit. So that stops you from being an effective board when one member can hold all of you hostage to his or her particular will. I believe that the method of voting for representatives should be similar to the way Virginia Beach elects its borough representatives. That is to say, everybody in the region would vote for candidates for a particular local spokesperson, but they would have to reside in the locality. I believe that provides the maximum accountability to the citizens of the region, and these folks would be evaluated at re-election time based on their actual performance in this particular context. The other modification that I would recommend is to consider a dedicated source of funding for public transit organizations to come out of the revenues that are dedicated to this particular body. There is no way to pave your way out of congestion. I defy you to show me an area in this country or in the world where that approach has ever worked. We need to have a multimodal approach along the lines of what is mandated for the TPO. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for sharing with us this morning. Next speaker, is Jonathan Nye.
Good morning, all.
Good morning, sir.
Yes. First, I want to thank some of my fellow citizens and everyone here. They did a very good job of presenting some of the technical information that us citizens deem as necessary to be conveyed to this group of people. And so my issue is on adaptive leadership because it's really time to look at our transportation habits. Like what was formerly pointed out, we cannot pave our way out of this situation. No matter what technical answers we have, it will not work. We've got to be renewed in the way we think and approach these situations. We need a more unified regional leadership and decision-making process if we're going to move forward as a whole and navigate the future. Yes, that's a direct challenge to everyone in this room. It's really disheartening that a single voice and vision wasn't identified. Looking at some of the commuting patterns found in Chapter 2-9, titled The State of Transportation, show more people are using single occupancy vehicle. That's a habit. That's something that we need to look at and address to change this mitigation, some of the climate issues. Looking at some of the existing funding structure in transit, it's archaic, and it really needs a more robust, dedicated platform without overtaxing and tolling the people. Looking at some of the school outreach that was done with the Box Community Project, seems to be a good thing, and it's great that we're reaching out to the youth and future generations. I do, however, question if they were taught the same types of practices that planners and engineers have been giving the public for over 20 years. More roads, wider roads, bigger, better, which, according to the facts and the charts, don't seem to be a working solution. If that is the case, it's time to go back to school, be a little more creative, use some more innovation, and perhaps think outside the box. Second issue, climate. With things like sea level rise and water and air quality issues, the future is more than just about congestion mitigation. It's about overall ecological, educational, and economical state of this region, the Chesapeake Bay, and our nation. If we don't get this right with the local and federal guidance on improving life quality and the need for sustainable and resilient communities, 2040 may as well be another traffic jam. What do we need? Is it new highways, bridges, and tunnels, or a change in how we're approaching the issue of mobility? Has anyone thought to ask why our Northern Commonwealth Fellows chose to invest in a Transportation Authority Fund with a focus on transit projects? We need a voice with the will and strength, similar to the man who created the Civilian Conservation Corps and put the region to work. On a side note, Saturday morning while waiting on the 45 bus at the Civic Station in downtown Norfolk to arrive and transport me to Portsmouth, at the scheduled 8:15 a.m., I too had to adapt and change my plan. Since the bus broke down, never showing up as scheduled, while myself and over 7 other transit users were left with no communication as to its whereabouts, even after 3 bus drivers passed by the stop. Instead of the next scheduled bus immediately moving and filling its place, it waited in queue for 30 minutes at the DNTC, less than a mile away from Civic Station. Therefore, because our regular transit provider doesn't have the mechanics to repair our buses timely, nor the funds to grow the fleet and to meet demand, an entire group of tax-paying citizens were late in making the crossing and another logistic failure occurred. Is this acceptable? There will be accountability and the issues will be resolved. The question is, are we going to be able to adapt to meet that challenge and not keep throwing technical solutions at it? After all is said and done, more is said than done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nye. Appreciate your time. Next item on the agenda, we do have a submitted public comments, correct? The next item is the minutes of August 21st, 2014 Hrtac retreat. Is there a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Second. Thank you. We do have an appropriate motion and a second. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. It passed. Next item, please, is the 2034 Long Range Transportation Plan Amendment. Dr. Camelia Rothenbach, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the Commission. I'm here this morning to give you a brief update on the 9 projects that you have seen in the last couple of months and the status on the 2034 Long Range Transportation Plan. I just put this slide here. It's just a review that any project that needs to be constructed in this region has to go through a planning and development process that you can see on these slides. There are 3 major steps that the project needs to go through. On the left, the planning and environmental process, and then moving into programming, and finally the final phase is project development that includes the preliminary engineering, design, and construction. If you look at the first column on the long-range transportation plan in the planning box, that's really one of the first steps. So every project needs to be included in the long-range transportation plan before it can move forward. You have seen this map with the 9 major projects that the HRTPO board recommended almost a year ago. You can see all those projects. That's 64. I'm going to show you in the next slides. This one shows 64 widening on the peninsula. It has 3 segments. Segment 1 from Jefferson to Yorktown Road, and then from Yorktown Road to 199 East, and the last segment is from 199 East to 199 West. And we also have the interchange at Fort Eustis Boulevard. All those projects, the idea is to add 1 additional lane in each direction to make it 6-lane interstate system. The next map shows the Hampton Road Third Crossing, has 3 components. The 664 widening from 664 interchange in Hampton all the way to the Bowers Hill interchange in Chesapeake. Then you have the Patriot Crossing and also the Craney Island connector. On this map, you can see the 264 interchange improvements, the 64 widening on the south side, including the high-rise bridge, and finally a short segment on 460 5813 that includes 2 interchanges at the Hampton Roads Executive Airport and the regional landfill. The segment 1 of 64 was included in the 2034 long-range plan back in January of 2012. And last week, on September 18, the HRTPO board took action to include all the other 8 HRTF projects into the 2034 long-range transportation plan. I just wanted to report that now that step is, we have taken care of that step, so the project can move forward to the next phase. So we thought that would be important to brief you all on that action that the HRTPO board took last week. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. I want to first of all thank Dr. McKinley-Price for his leadership at the TPO and all the membership for allowing that important step to move forward, which will currently bring us into the next item, unless there's any comments or any questions for Dr. Robinbach at this time.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Joanna.
I don't know if this is a question for her or someone. Does this include tolls?
No delegate.
There will be no tolls on what we build?
Right now, this is just inclusion of this project in the long-range plan. After that, a complete comprehensive financing analysis needs to be done. And I think this commission is going to be responsible for that, working with VDOT and the Secretary's office.
Yeah, I can make a quick comment, Delegate. All this does is say they're eligible for funding. The source of the funding still has to be identified. So because you put them in the plan doesn't mean they're funded.
Further question then.
Yes, sir.
If we agree that these programs all go into the, are approved, then we're stuck if you need extra money by funding, by tolling?
Don't mean to, Dr. Robin, if you want to explain, this is the long-range plan for the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization, which is a federal plan. And you have put it in the federal long-range plan, suggesting that these are things as federal monies or state monies or other monies come available, this is in your package. The 6-year plan at the state has very little on these projects. You could use Hrtac monies on these projects. You could use other sources that you identify. So all this does is allow you to move planning forward as you're working at the federal level in the TPO. So this has not said these projects are going to get built, nor have you identified all the funds for them.
If I may say to the delegate, these are the only projects that are currently and only being discussed by Hrtac at this time, right, Mr. Secretary?
That's correct. Although you are not limited to do so, I think that's what your intention is.
Yes, and in fact, if we, the next item for the Secretary will probably put more light on these particular projects. Please continue, Mr. Joanna.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm probably might be the only one on this board that was opposed to tolls, but if we set up another taxing system.
I'm sorry, did somebody, I apologize. Please, Mr. Joanna.
On the record anyway, if we are taxing people to try to get enough money to build whatever crossing it might be, my real concern then follows that. Does that mean that we're going to do what we did in Portsmouth and toll a facility that's not being built, not being expanded to include more traffic, and tolling it to pay for some other facility?
Again, Mr. Wagner.
I'll try to handle this in discussions I had with Secretary Lane, that a number of these projects could be, and I think Secretary Lane will probably discuss this, could be accomplished with the existing cash flow that we have over the period of time, given how long the environmental impact statements take and how long the studies take and how long the design work takes. When you start to lay that on top of everything and match that with the revenue collections collected to date, plus what's anticipated in the future, the majority, I'll say the majority by count number, can be accomplished with the existing cash flow. then at that point, it becomes a discussion that the cash flow, I don't believe, will support some of the larger projects that we're looking at. That quite frankly have a lot of design work left, spade work left, if you will, to get to the point where we can even talk about how to fund them. However, I believe Secretary Lane will tell you that VDOT is conducting a toll study. I don't think he's prepared to talk about tolls one way or the other at this point. As you may recall, got the tolls off of Route 44, now 264, with the thought being that interstate highway money would then weigh in to do the maintenance, and I think we can see the results of that. I share your concerns with tolling existing facilities to pay for other facilities. I don't think that's in the realm, but, you know, I'll wait to see what the study has to say. But I think beyond that, I think perhaps Secretary Lane can provide some more output. But I will tell you that given what I see is the cash flow coming in, as well as what we might be able to get out of the overall Transportation Trust Fund, that many of these projects can be accomplished and are ready to go. Or I might add, you know, the environmental work is either completed or well on its way to being completed. That they can proceed ahead now, or we can start to see some active construction work at areas that involve, and I don't want to steal the Secretary's thunder, I don't think, but I-64 widening, probably all the way to Homicide Parkway, that it can accomplish the 264 interchange. These are major commuter choke points that can be accomplished now. And beyond that, I'll let Secretary Lane explain. But I think within that, and we have the permits, and the permits are well on their way to being accomplished right now, to be able to accomplish those projects. But I think the discussion of tolls at this point probably is a bit premature because, you know, we don't even, you know, we're still looking at the design work in that, but I'll be quiet at this point.
Just one question from Senator Wagner. If we go ahead and vote for these, whatever the programs might be, does that mean we're going to be committed to tolls?
Let me just say this, I don't believe we're voting on any projects today. This is just an informational.
No, I'm going to be asking you to vote on a couple of projects today, but I don't think tolls are a discussion for today in terms of what I'm going to be speaking about.
Let me just say this, yeah, the projects being put forward do not involve tolls. The ones we're looking at today, that we're going to talk about committing some funds to at this point in time, do not involve tolls. Like I said earlier, can be accomplished with the existing cash flow and that we have coming in. But those discussions and those votes and those types of things, I think, first of all, you know, I believe VDOT is going to be accomplished in the toll study. Take a look at some of these things, and I know Secretary Lane and I have some discussions about some points where we might be able to bring, might be able to talk about midtown, downtown tunnel discussions as part of an overall package to provide some really, I think we're way ahead of ourselves at that point, but I would say to you that I think we have some opportunities here, but I think more importantly, we have some opportunities today to accomplish some things that will immediately relieve community congestion that I think we've all seen around here.
And these, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
And these projects today, if we vote for them, will not bind us and will not include tolls. Is that correct?
That's correct. And
No further questions.
Will not bind us in any way to any future projects on down the road.
Unless there's any further discussion, I think it would be appropriate at this time. And I thank you, Dr. Raubenbach, for your comments. We're fortunate to have our Secretary of Transportation here from the Commonwealth. We're very graced by your presence here. We thank you. We look forward to all that you have to say to us today. Good morning, Secretary Aubrey Lane.
Mr. Chairman. Dr. Raubenbach, what do I just push the right button if I want to move the screen forward? The right side, okay. Let me take a few minutes and, well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman and others for inviting me here today or allowing me to come to today. Governor McAuliffe knows I'm here, so let me say on behalf of him, I appreciate all the good work that you are taking under to try to make the driving experience and transportation experience better for those in Hampton Roads. Just a couple of comments. Governor McAuliffe campaigned on and is governing on opening up the transportation system here in Hampton Roads. I'm native of the area. I don't think the governor made clear that he wanted a transportation secretary from this area. In addition to that commitment, we just announced our $13 billion six-year plan in June. Over almost 30% of those monies are here on projects in Hampton Roads, by far the largest amount across the Commonwealth. That also includes $155 million for extension of light rail from Norfolk to the town center in Virginia Beach or wherever the city council decides to take it, in addition to looking at studies to the naval base. So it's a multimodal commitment that Governor McAuliffe has led in terms of keeping his promise, and it's so vital that we do unlock the transportation here in Hampton Roads. Heard some comments this morning in regards our major industries here, they being Department of Defense, the port and tourism. All of that is dependent upon this transportation network. And of course, nothing could be more important than getting this right in the work that you do. And Governor McAuliffe directed me upon coming in office to work with the legislature, and I thank those, Chairman Jones, Delegate Jones, and others. But I want to make clear that this was a bipartisan and bicameral effort here, and that Governor McAuliffe and myself were very involved in making sure this entity came into existence. Quite frankly, because without it, there was no ways to use the additional taxes that were being raised here in Hampton Roads for transportation projects. Now, I know you have a very difficult job. And in fact, some of the headlines that have come out recently have made that even more difficult because of public confidence. I know we had an issue when I was on the Commonwealth Transportation Board, was the 264 and its condition. And I can assure you today that's being taken care of as we look at all the stuff that's being done out there. We had a couple of contracts that have been recently talked about and in the news, 460 being one, where we've spent a lot of money and we don't have a permit. But Governor McAuliffe approved suspension of that work. We've been working with our federal partners, and we will hopefully have a permit on that in the next few months, or at least know where we're going. In that regard, it's caused VDOT to look at how it looks at wetlands and high-risk projects, and we're working with the legislature on P3 projects, public-private partnerships, and how we make them better and more accountable, both for the public and the Commonwealth Transportation Board, how they can be more involved. I just heard mention to the downtown Midtown tunnel and the issues that we're having with the billing of the concessionaire here and the steps that we're taking to get those correct. So I understand you have some issues to deal with. Part of that is because of, quite frankly, the state's performance and holding these people accountable. And that's, I can assure you, Governor McAuliffe is focused on that, and we will continue to do that as we go through to make this better, these projects better for Hampton Roads and the motorists and, of course, all the state's citizens. So I understand what you have to do. You have a fairly significant task. Now, a couple things I just want to point out. I know a lot of reference has been made to Northern Virginia, which they have a similar organization, but quite frankly, I would encourage you to do what you think is right and feel as you go through this, you determine how it is to best run this in that regard. Grinley Johnson, my deputy secretary, has been working with you as you get this entity going and understanding what your fiduciary responsibilities are, and she will continue to do that and support you in those efforts. But while you're doing that, we have about $175 million that's already been raised here in Hampton Roads for projects, and I'd like a recommendation to you today as to how we can go about putting those to good use for the citizens of Hampton Roads. If you look, and Dr. Rockenbach just had up on the screen the projects that you put into your long-range plan, and these are a couple of them that are up there. It's the widening of 64 on the peninsula, which is divided into 3 segments, going all the way up to the west 199 interchange, including the Fort Eustis interchange. On the peninsula, if this were to be accomplished, 90% of the choke points that come down from Richmond, although we eventually want to get it all the way to Richmond, 90% of the choke points would be taken care of if we're able to do this. So that is a very significant project, no matter what else we do on water crossings or anything else in Hampton roads. The second is the I-264-64 interchange improvements. Here, right on the border of Norfolk and Virginia Beach. Again, if you're looking at through traffic through the area, that is a major choke point, a major safety point in getting off the Interstate 64 onto 264. So in any event, no matter what else is done in Hampton roads, these projects have to get done. These projects do not, Delegate Johanna, they do not include tolling. These projects would be built to go in with the existing roadways. Of course, on the peninsula, with the 64 widening, it's an additional lane in each direction in that regard. So those are key to any transportation network success in Hampton roads. Then also there was discussion this morning, there are two development activities as you discern where you want to put your monies on a water crossing, is to complete the environmental documents at the Patriots Crossing, or the third crossing, and to complete high-rise bridge environmental and preliminary engineering. The thought would be to get those projects in line so that when you make a decision on how you'd like to direct those funds to be spent, they'd be ready to go. So what I'm suggesting this morning of these projects are key to us, or in your planning and moving forward. This is a little picture again, you've seen it on the screen as to where these projects would come into play, the widening of 64 on the peninsula, and of course the interchange here on 64-264. You all know these projects, you've been talking about them a lot. Now, there's been discussion about tolling and the financial plan. I know this is hard to read. But as I said, there's $174 million already not in your bank, because you'll be doing that later, but held for you by the Commonwealth of Virginia for taxes that have been collected here since the new law went into place. In addition, there's about $126 million that are in the statewide funds in the 6-year plan connected to these projects. So there's a little over $300 million sitting right there that's available to be immediately to be used on projects if you so desire. If you go down and look at the cost of the projects, you can see that down there where under the construction breakdown, it's a listing of the projects. These are a little bit more, slightly more than you had in the plan you just saw from Dr. Robinbach. That's because we have done a very detailed scrub, VDOT and independent consultants did a detailed scrub of what these projects, I actually believe these are conservative numbers, but we believe the projects can be built for this amount. So that's roughly $1.074 billion, a little over $1 billion for the construction of the projects. Then there's $5 million to complete the environmental on the Patriots Crossing and $20 million to get the high-rise bridge in a position where it could be built should you decide to move forward with programs. So quite frankly, what you have in front of you is a cash flow over the next several years. It takes the beginning balances and the anticipated construction draws. I have Commissioner Charlie Kilpatrick here today, but we looked at the timing of these projects to match the monies as they come in. So you have the ability to bond, but we are not recommending you do any bonding of the monies here. This is strictly out of cash flow. And by the way, if you look at future years' cash flow, I've taken the liberty to reduce what I believe you would actually get by 30% to be conservative. In other words, based on the economic activity, we'd originally planned to be at 180 to 190 million here. I've only projected about 70% of that going forward to be conservative. So you can see as we go across in the timing, you always have a significant amount of cash flow, cash in the bank on hand. Now, this does not preclude you doing anything else. If you choose that you want to do another major project that requires bonding, this does not preclude that, because bonding is done on future revenues, not what you've already spent or what's committed. So if you were to come in the next year or 18 months and say, we want to do additional revenues and we want to issue bonds to do that, that can be done. This plan does not impede any of that. So if you look across, again, we think this is very conservative. These are projects that are very necessary to the citizens of Hampton Roads and the motorists, to your transportation success. I think from my listening on the CTB and your meetings, there's pretty well general agreement around the area that these projects have to get done. And so if you summarize while we're making the suggestions, I mean, quite frankly, we've got a lot of money, and I think the citizens demand that we start proving that we can use this money effectively to helping their lives get better. I believe once you get going, it will help for momentum for regionally significant projects, these some major issues that you have to decide upon. And none of these major projects are infected. Anything that you want to do going forward is still at your availability. Again, I mentioned the 2 water crossings. And it allows you to focus on your governance framework and policy over the next year. As I said, Deputy Secretary Johnson supporting in that. And the way I would envision this happening is that you would enter into a memorandum of understanding with myself, the Secretary of Transportation, that we would be working under your direction until your organization is in place to deliver these projects. I would also, the administrative cost associated would be borne at the state level. So that gives you time to get your organization set up. So it would again be directly working for you under a memorandum of understanding. In effect, I'm actually asking to be your executive director until you get one in place to get these projects going in that. So that is the proposal I have before you today. And I would request that at the end of this, if it be your pleasure, that we would authorize us to develop this memorandum of understanding to put before you to move forward on these projects. But with that, I'd be happy to take any questions and answer any questions for you as regards this proposal from us.
Before I open up to the floor, if I can ask Senator Wagner, please.
Mr. Secretary, there's
Yes.
been a slight half-hitch in terms of trying to approve projects today that's brought to our,
Okay.
by General Counsel. And that is, we were going to hopefully move forward on an agenda item to approve a budget. We need to put this funding plan as part of that budget if we're going to follow exactly what's in the code, and we absolutely should follow exactly what's in the code. So it would be my proposal to incorporate what you have laid out into the budget, and hopefully the draft budget will be approved so that we can then send it out for public hearing, a 30-day advertisement, and be able to come back with a definitive statement that not only have we approved an annual budget, we've also approved the funding plan, and it's gone through the appropriate processes to funding, and I think we need to do that in an abundance of caution to make sure that this thing executes properly. And so that was brought to our attention, and as I go through the budget, I'm having staff now try to continue to add up so that people have a hard copy of what we're looking at and the dollar values for each of the projects that you proposed on the previous slide.
Thank you. Is there any further comments for the Secretary? Mr. Hunt?
Yes, just one. I think it will help the Finance Committee, even if we take a vote on commitment, that we basically are in general agreement with what the Secretary has laid out, and also to go ahead and task him to develop the MOU. I think that those are good movements forward that basically shows where this region, where this body is heading. I understand without the budget that we cannot finally approve it until the budget is approved, but I think that this body can instruct the Finance Committee to insert it. And and basically say, these are good dollars to spend at this point in time. So I don't know if we need to amend the agenda items at all, but I would like to make that motion at this time.
Why don't we go ahead and wait for the presentation of the budget and include it at that time?
Very good.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Wright, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. My question goes back along the lines of what Delegate Joanna was, I think, trying to get to with this whole tolling piece. We clearly understand that we've got 9 mega projects that we're focusing on here currently, and we kind of know what the dollars are going to be, 20, 25 billion or whatever. I really would like to see either your office or someone to put together a model for this whole tolling piece for all of these activities, so we don't, and I'm supportive of what we're going to do here today. I really think we need to get off the dime on this piece and go ahead and have you operate as our acting executive director, the way you put it. But I think we need to look at all of this in totality as a system, and to make sure that, one, we don't wind up with the last project getting told just because we've taken all the money and promised everybody we won't toll the first ones. I think we need to do that because we understand what tolling has done to this region, what it's done here today, Midtown and Downtown Tunnel, and how people have changed their patterns. And so, can your office, and I think you and I have talked about this, can you, or do you have a model, something that's pretty reliable that we could all look at and look at this thing up front instead of making these type of decisions and then deferring that later?
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mayor Wright, we do have a model. In fact, what I would recommend is also working with your technical review committee. And the reason that we haven't distributed the model is because we don't have a director or anything yet and didn't want to get ahead of the process. But there is one, we've developed one working with KPMG outside. That's a high-level model that looks at the various options, whether you use tolls, you don't use tolls, you bond, you don't bond, and how long it impacts the projects. If you look at the cost of the projects, in fact, I've seen some presentations down here, and I believe they're low, because if you're going to start the project 8 years from now, it's going to cost a lot more than we're projecting today. I mean, this $8.5 billion that you've actually showed in the long-range plan is not near enough, because you can't start all those projects today. But specifically, yes, we can do that. This amount of money is not going to significantly impact it, as I've said, but I'll be happy to do that. And I think the appropriate way, Mayor, is to work with the technical review committee. That's what it was for. Let them then make a recommendation to you for y'all's discernment. I agree, it's going to take a lot of time. And that way, if they work on it and then give it to you through a presentation, I think it'll be meaningful. But yes, sir, I couldn't agree more. That's what we should do.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, one more question.
Yes, sir.
The cost piece, and we brought this up in the TPO, and I think several of us agree that these numbers that we've put out estimating these projects, and there's a rough order of magnitude there, and we really need to kind of scrub those things, because we really need to know what we're working with. And you know, I think there are opportunities that we can do something with this Midtown Downtown Tunnel project. I know it's a public-private partnership. I understand the sensitivity of that, but I think we need to scrub these numbers and make sure we as a commission understand what we're working with. And if there are opportunities to put some relief there, I'd like to see that. But also, if there's opportunities to expand our projects and add another one, if we're operating off of these numbers with these rough order of magnitudes, and I think VDOT mentioned somewhere about plus or minus 30% in the TPO meeting, that's a huge variance there. And at some point, we need to bring that number in closer to home. Can you also lead that piece?
I can. In fact, the model we've already gone out and looked at these projects and scrubbed them pretty hard. So we are prepared to do that. Quite frankly, I didn't want to get ahead of the commission and presume that we were making any decisions. But I think, again, Mayor, we can go, if it's approved, in addition to these other actions on these, I'll be more than happy the next 30 days to get with the technical committee, have a presentation to them so they can update you guys. But I do believe, because I think the numbers, really, when you get down to it, it's time and money. And so the less money the longer time it takes. I mean, I'm not trying to make it clear, but that's right. The more money you have in, the quicker it goes. So it's, I think, a model that could be very useful to you. I just didn't want to presume to get ahead of the commission.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Ashburn, please.
This is not a comment directly on the proposals because I do support the projects that have been listed. But for me, setting a precedence of voting on something that wasn't on the agenda is what I have a little heartburn with. If we could have, especially major decisions that we're going to make, and they go out for public viewing as well, if we could have them put on the agenda before we vote on major commitments, I would appreciate it.
Mr. Wagner, please.
If I could respond briefly. All we're doing today, and I think we all know the cost of these projects, all we're doing today is approving a draft budget that ultimately VDOT will schedule the 30 days, require 30 days in the public hearing. And then we'll actually come back and make the official vote on these projects today. I think all the information that you need here was just the lawyer got involved. We have the information in front of you today that knows what these projects are, what we'd like to move forward, and knows the cost estimate for those projects. All we're doing is taking that and adding that to the draft budget that's already there. So we have the information in front of us. You know, it basically says that it's a draft budget. So we're adding that draft to the draft budget if the committee so chooses to add it as part of the overall draft budget, and then say, okay, this is a package that we can now put forward to the public for public comment, and then come back and officially vote on it. So I don't think that it reaches that level, but there may be other concerns.
Well, I was just speaking to, I read through the draft budget. It's not included in the draft budget, so therefore it's not included on the agenda. So that's all.
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Order on that.
Well, you're on the Finance Committee, but I do have somebody waiting. Is this to address this, Ms. Jones?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I just wanted to, I absolutely support the mayor's comments, and Senator Wagner, appreciate the clarification, but that was a concern I had, is all of a sudden I was hearing about projects that we were going to be asked to take action on at today's meeting, and I hadn't heard anything prior to the meeting. And not saying, being not supporting or supportive of, I'm just, that process, I appreciate the legal clarification and we need to make sure that not only are all board members have the opportunity to study the information prior to coming to the meeting, but also that ensuring that the citizens have the same opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt, please.
Okay, so now if I could clarify what I was asking. Basically, the Finance Committee is your committee, okay? And I'm asking you to let us know your feelings on inserting this plan into your budget. We really don't do this unilaterally. We basically need to hear from this body that says, generally, we're in agreement. Put it in the budget that we're going to consider for due diligence, which includes a public hearing and an approved document. Otherwise, you keep stringing this thing out. And what I'm not interested in is stringing things out. I think that we all agree, and I have not heard one negative comment, that we all agree with this proposal. All I'm looking for is that we do it, and we do it in a timely manner. Insert it in the draft budget, give your Finance Committee that word to put it in the budget for you, and then when we do the public hearing, we'll actually approve it. That's all we're asking to do here. And I think the other part will be to develop the MOA, which does not count for money whatsoever.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Ms. Lucas, did you have a question?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Wagner?
I just want to add that, and I apologize that this did not come up. We knew the projects. We thought we'd move ahead with the projects until the council pointed out that, no, it needs to be part of the public hearing process and that type of thing. So I'm not familiar with locality budgets, but I am familiar with the state budget it goes through, and it's amended routinely throughout the process, including on the floor. All we're asking the committee to do is we have a draft budget that would be presented to you that's up for amending. That's why we have a draft budget. If someone wants to propose that amendment to add these projects to it prior to it going out for the public hearing, that will happen. It'll be a complete budget. Otherwise, in my estimation, all we can do today, in the absence of amending the budget that we're getting ready to present, is go ahead and have a public hearing on this, then have to come back, approve these projects, and then go out another 30, 90, 60, 90 days. And I just think that the citizens that are, have ample time to review this. All the members of the Hrtac will have ample time, because it doesn't mean anything. It's coming back as a draft budget that's gone through the public hearing process. The comments that we get in the public hearing process will be heard. And then at that point, you're free to amend the budget again, or propose amendments to that budget prior to it being finally approved at the meeting that will be in November or December. So I believe that's a schedule, and unless I'm missing something here, that any member can propose that amendment. We can take an affirmative vote whether to add these projects to the budget or not add those projects to the budget.
Mr. Secretary, is there anything you want to add at this time? Excuse me, Mr. Wallace, please.
I'd like to get some clarification in terms of what I'm voting on. I had materials that presented a budget for a staff in terms of that particular directive, and now we have hearing a presentation about a budget for project, and we're getting that at this particular juncture. So when we say we're developing a draft budget, we're developing a draft budget for both staff and projects, or just projects?
Mr. Wagner?
It would be my hope that we do staff and projects so that we can get started on these projects. I mean, the bulk of them are going to be on the peninsula. And I understand critical projects. I've been part of the traffic jam over there. I would hate to see this process slow down, knowing that it's only going to cost more money the longer we delay in moving forward with these projects. So it would be my hope that we can do that. Understand, when we get done, if we take this action, it'll still be a draft budget. It'll still not be a final budget. You're not finally approving these projects. All you're doing is approving the consideration of these projects. Go in as part of the draft budget. It'll still be a draft budget when it comes out of here. It'll be referred to VDOT for the public hearing process. And it'll go through the 30-day advertising for the public hearing. It'll have a full public hearing, and then VDOT will collect the comments and deliver them back to us for us to incorporate, and we can still, at that point, amend that budget prior to finally approving the budget. So we're just trying to ensure that this process moves forward in a timely manner. Again, none of these projects that are being presented today would be involved tolls, but we would be approving to move some environmental work on some of the larger projects forward so that they can continue the process, because it can be a lengthy time frame to get the environmental permits approved. So we need to provide the small bit of funding to keep the ball rolling on those projects, while those that are shovel ready are almost shovel ready. At this point, we can actually start turning dirt and doing that. The more we delay, the more expensive these projects are going to become. And I think the more disenchanted the public will be that we're actually seeing things accomplished. So, I mean, I just trying to move the process forward. I don't think there's no malice or forethought. This is the Secretary and the Governor's proposal. And in many cases of these projects, what they feel based on what VDOT's progress is to this point, that these projects can move forward. And given that VDOT has said, yeah, we're very, very close to being shovel ready, it's up to us to decide whether or not to provide the funding for these projects. And you know, I will point out that, again, once again, the bulk of these things are on the peninsula. Will help the peninsula, the ones that are coming right out of the chute.
Thank you. Any other further comments? Yes, ma'am.
One more, I'm sorry.
Please, not be sorry.
During Secretary Lane's presentation, you mentioned something about being a temporary or interim or an executive director. Is there a monetary figure that goes with that should be included in the budget?
Yes, nothing to Hrtac. I do hope to get my current state salary, but no, there's nothing at all. In fact, we're going down a separate track. That's why I mentioned Ms. Johnson will still work with you as you get your governance and all set up in that. All we were asking for today was an expression from the group that this is the way you want to go. We understand you can't approve them today in terms of actually doing it, but getting it in the budget. Sure. You had a budget on there. If we got that, then I would direct state resources to get this teed up for the public hearings and go through all that is needed to move this process forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sessoms, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think we also need to reinforce that we've been through the process for years now, getting these projects where they are. And I got to tell you, I'm getting pretty excited with the thought of us really having the opportunity to move forward. And as such, I'd like to make a motion that we do include those two projects that have been recommended by the Secretary
If I may,
to be put into the budget.
that might be helpful during the time a budget is presented. I think that's what Mr. Hunt is referring to. If you would just defer that motion at this time for the amendment, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Mr. Price?
Yeah, I just wanted to support Senator Wagner's comments, and actually I was going to request to make the motion at appropriate time.
You can do it.
That's wonderful. Is there anything else at this time you'd like to add, Mr. Secretary?
Mayor Wright has
Yeah,
questions.
actually, it's for the Secretary. I see our segment here, segment 3, and where our jurisdictional boundaries end, just from a statewide perspective.
Yep.
Are our counterparts up north looking at picking up from there and taking it all the way through?
Yeah.
Are we there yet? Can we speak on that?
We're not there yet, but as you know, House Bill 2, the new scoring prioritization process, which we just had a hearing here last Thursday night on, is now law, which requires any additional state funds to have to go through a scoring process. And I mentioned that we've got here in Hampton Roads 30% of those. Next 4 or 5 years, there is no state money that hasn't been obligated. So what I'm working with, Mayor Wright, is the Richmond District. I'm going up there to speak with them later this week about getting that project in the statewide plan, like in their long-range plan and in the statewide prioritization. I should mention that while these projects I'm proposing have $126 million of state money on them, your other projects are certainly eligible as we go through the 6-year plans in the future, but remember, they've got to go through House Bill 2, which they have to be scored, and quite frankly, those monies are 6, 7 years out in the future in that. So I think that's key. I'm glad you brought it up, Mayor Wright. That's key for you here in this model that you've talked about is, yes, I certainly expect the state to participate in the future on major projects, but it's a ways out, and they got to go through. So I think that's a key point to get that model, and you can see how to use your monies more effectively. But yes, sir, I'm working with the city of the Richmond District on getting the piece all the way, at least to 295, if not all the way to Richmond.
Thank you. We seem to all be in one accord. Moving to the next item, Mr. Secretary, is there anything you want to add then?
No, thank you for your time today.
Thank you for yours, sir. Next will be Finance Committee report. Mr. Wagner, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and your Finance Committee has put together a budget, and we've had extensive discussions and routed through the Finance Committee, collected comments, and the budget before you is based on the vote that was taken at the previous meeting in terms of having Hrtac as a standalone commission and not falling under some governance other than that. And I believe the first diagram will show you, if we can get it up there, that Hrtac is indeed established and set up as exactly as this committee has voted as a standalone organization. The other structures continue to be the same in terms of HRPDC, HRPTO, and the executive director. So based on that affirmative vote that we put together, if you go to page 3, you'll see where we actually presented the budget that represents significantly less than 1% of the overall revenues collected, and is almost comparable to, once we get the state treasury out of the fee that they're charging right now, would be significant savings towards the overall budget, the goal being to keep administrative costs as low as practicable, but establishing salaries that will provide the types of people that can support this organization and move forward and monitor and move forward on these projects. So I would, based on extensive discussions prior to taking the vote, if the committee, and let me just finish up, you can see the salary ranges on the next slide. the types of people that the Finance Committee felt was important to support the organization, other administrative costs and those types of things that we need staff support and people that might assist in staff. And on the final page, again, a timeline about why it's so important. Today, we will take up the vote on the budget in terms of actually moving forward with the draft. I think the process I'll go over one more time is that with the draft budget approved today, it would then go out, would transfer it over to VDOT. They would do the appropriate advertising for public hearing. Public hearing would then be held on this budget. VDOT will collect the comments from the public hearing for consideration of all the public comments prior to us taking up the budget and finally approving the budget probably in December by the time this is done. So although we've been here for 6 months, it's going to take every bit of 6 months to get us in a position where we can actually move forward with the staff and actually move forward with getting these projects funded and moving forward. Any slip in the organization would necessarily kick this out additional months, and then we'll run into a process where a number of the members here that are in the General Assembly will not even be available for a meeting to do that. And so I would be my hope that we can move forward, as we've just previously discussed at length, as part of compliance with the code, that as part of this budget, that the initial projects that have been discussed, that the Secretary has amply discussed, be incorporated as part of this draft budget, and then move forward so it too can go through the public hearing process that's required by the code. And with the after public comments are taken, again, this committee can then take it up as a final approval, and it can be amendable at any point in the stage as it goes through the process prior to final approval. So this is by far and away not even the beginning. It is the beginning of the end, but the end of the phase of trying to get organized, but it's just the start of actually moving forward to make this a viable organization and actually see some projects get done. So I'd be delighted to answer any questions that anyone may have. I have put the budget, if someone were to propose, a member was to propose an amendment to add these projects at that dollar value limit to the draft budget, and then we will incorporate that document when we turn it over to VDOT for them to be able to not only hold public hearings on the administrative budget side, but also hold the public hearings in tandem with that on the proposed projects and the funding. And once again, none of these projects would involve tolls. We have taken the timeline and run the timeline out, and all can be accomplished given the existing cash flow of the dollars being collected with the regional money. And that doesn't even include what we hope we can get out of the 6-year plan and out of the Transportation Trust Fund to help, if you will, supplement the dollar values on this. And we will be very much working with the Secretary and others to help, if you will, subsidize the cost out of our regionally collected money, using some statewide money to even further decrease that. So with that, I'll be delighted to answer any questions.
Let me just say, it's my understanding, Dr. Rodenbach, November 5th is the public hearing for the budget.
It's a tentative date.
Tentative date is November 5th. Mr. Joanno, please.
On page 5, Sandra, if you'll take a look at that just for a second. You talk about the HRTPO support staff. I'm assuming it's going to be replaced. Is that correct?
I'm sorry?
Is that staff going to be replaced?
No, that's a supplement. HRTPO, my understanding, Camellia can fill you in a little better with this, they have to basically charge out to different accounts. They've been doing all this spade work for us now, basically out of the goodness of their heart, and trying to get the organization going. But rather than go out and hire a full-time employee, as an effort to keep the administrative costs of Hrtac as low as possible, is our opinion that it's far cheaper to go out and transfer some of the money to provide part-time, if you will, part-time administrative support in the areas that you read here. Be far cheaper for us to go ahead and transfer some money over to HRTPO, and if you will, buy the time for the part-time help that's already employed by HRTPO to help them, to help us provide that without having to go out and hire full-time employees or go out and issue individual consulting contracts for us to be able to need the services we need, knowing that we only need these services part-time.
Further question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I thought we took the position that we're going to be separated from the TPO.
And Mr. Chairman, I would respond to Delegate Joanna that, yes, we are, and we are separate. All you're doing is contracting for services, buying a particular service for a particular period of time for a particular problem and paying for the services. The alternative of that would have to be to go out to advertise. If we needed the support services, go out and advertise to hire a consultant to provide these services, probably not nearly at the same cost levels, probably a far greater expense to that, and that's our opinion. If we find, I would submit to you that if we find that HRTPO's expenses are more expensive than what that we can provide from some other source, we'll use the other source. But at this point in time, if you look at the dollar values and the types of administrative support that we're looking at, I think we got a pretty good deal here.
Mr. Chairman, further question?
Yes, sir.
I'm worried about the leakage between the two operations.
Well,
And what I'm saying to you is, are they going to try to direct us to go one way? The Deputy Executive Director for HRTPO, the Public Involvement and Title Administrator, Senior Administrative Assistant, Assistant General Service Manager. If we take all those people in, they're going to be advising the regular, they're going to be your staff. So you don't have a staff that's working for the HRTAC.
If I may, I apologize to Mr. Wagner. I see Mr. Lane, but I've had others who directed me that this is for a short term, I understand. But Mr. Secretary, would you please?
I was just going to mention this, I understand to be for the short term to get your executive director in place and then he gets his organization together. So I don't believe, and I don't want to put it in Senator's his remarks, but I don't believe this is a long term. He's trying to get you through to get the executive director and then let that person make his recommendations or her recommendations to you as to what the staff should be.
No further question. I understand this is a transition only and not a permanent situation.
I'm sorry, Delegate Jano, if I didn't make that clear.
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there any other questions for Mr. Wagner before we move on?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would make a motion that we amend the proposed draft budget to incorporate the projects that were, if we could put up that previous slide.
Thank you. We do have a
To
motion.
incorporate these projects and those dollar values as limits to those projects to be considered as part of the overall budget submission that will then go through a public hearing and incorporate that as also part of the draft budget. I would make that motion.
We have a number of seconds. I recognize Ms. Johnson, please. Is that your
Yes,
second?
I'll second that.
Thank you.
I would request that we amend that and also request that the state prepare the MOU for us to operate with.
Is that concurring with the maker of the motion?
Yeah.
Are you okay with, as a second, that will be incorporated in the motion then? Is there any further discussion on the motion? Would you please read the motion, Dr. Rodenbach?
Is to approve the draft budget, including the list of projects, and also to develop the MOU.
Thank you. Is all minds cleared? With that being said, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Wagner.
And now, Mr. Chairman, I would make the motion that the draft budget, which incorporates the amendments that we just adopted, be moved forward to the next process, which would be to refer this budget to VDOT for the appropriate advertisement and public hearing, and the public hearing at VDOT be then required to report back to us the results of the public hearing along with all the comments.
Thank you. May I have a second, please?
I'll second.
There is a second by Dr. Price. Dr. Rodenbach, would you please read the motion?
The motion is to move the draft budget, the amended draft budget, including the list of projects, to VDOT for public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, sir.
Just one question. My Deputy Director Johnson will make sure this happens, but it may not be actually VDOT because it'll be Hrtac with VDOT working on its behalf. I want to make people clear that this is the Hrtac. It's not going to be VDOT, big signs. Just you guys are making the decision, so just want to make sure.
So, thank you. Those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. Motion carries. So it appears, Ms. Grindley Johnson, that you've been authorized to get us an executive director. That was last week, so we're asking you to continue moving forward.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one more agenda item, if I could.
Please, Part B.
Thank you. Members of the commission and Mr. Chairman, you have before you a draft, the total document, which is a RFP that I hope we can put out to all the banks in the region that'll allow for the Hrtac to be established banking accounts so that we can now hold in reserve not only an operating fund but also the overall large sums of money that will be required to be transferred ultimately to see these projects through to completion. This is a result of a lot of input. We asked for from several organizations, several government entities, the proposals that they had put out for banking services to use as draft guidelines. We had several treasurers of cities that are involved in the finance department. Particularly, I'd like to thank the staff over at the city of Chesapeake for their input in developing this RFP. The RFP before you, we believe, would provide for multiple institutions, or we can just select one institution. There's guidelines that'll be put together that, and we will ask that we solicit these proposals so that we can hopefully in tandem while we approve an overall budget that we can then approve the winning bid for banking service bid or bids for banking services. I will note, if you note that on the agenda item that deals with this, it says inform approval. This will allow for some minor changes to the RFP overall. Ms. Raystein has offered up an amendment that I believe is very much apropos, that as part of your submission of an RFP for banking services that you provide a listing of all the members of the board of directors on the bank. And if you happen to be a national bank, obviously those that represent the regional board of directors. If you're a BB&T or one of the major banks that has an overall board but has a regional board that looks at the loans. With that amendment, I don't assume anybody, when we say inform, we feel like we can add that particular provision to the overall RFP inform. So you have before you a copy, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions with regards to the RFP, and hopefully the committee will act affirmatively to allow us to go ahead and issue the RFP. Once again, we'll have to come back with who the recommendation of which bank or banks represent us, the winning solicitation, why they represent the winning solicitations, and hopefully at that meeting in December, I'll ask for your approval to go ahead and make the award. So with that, I'd be delighted to answer any questions.
Before I ask for a motion, any questions for Mr. Wagner?
Question.
Yes, please, Mr. Wallace.
Is the presumption that we'll be just accepting proposals, or we'll be looking at just one banking institution for all of our services?
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Wallace, this solicitation will go out to every bank. There's a number of banks that have already expressed interest, but every banking institution will be provided a copy of the RFP. Typically what happens is you advertise, you have to ask for, so we will not formally take an action to deliver RFPs to every bank, but it'll be advertised in accordance with the procurement laws that this RFP is on the street, and there are already a number of banks that said, please send us a copy of the RFP when it's complete. So I'm confident that there'll be ample competition. If there's not a perception of ample competition out there, then we would like the opportunity to go ahead and solicit other banks if we don't feel there's ample competition. But based on the initial reaction from banks, there appears there to be more than sufficient competition for this.
Yes, Mr. Secretary, please.
May I have a redirect, sir?
I apologize, Mr. Wallace.
What my question was getting at is not in terms of the solicitation process and minimizing or eliminating that in any context. I was just saying, once we make an assessment in terms of what our needs are, is our needs going to be predicated on the fact that we're going to only use one bank to satisfy our needs, or is it a possibility that we can use more than one bank?
And Mr. Chairman, if I might respond, the solicitation does allow for either the selection of one bank or multiple banks based on the evaluation and what would be in consideration of best interest. But at this point, that decision hasn't been made, but I will tell you, Mr. Chairman, that the flexibility is written into the RFP to allow for more than one bank to provide banking services.
Mr. Secretary? Thank you, sir. Mr. Secretary?
Just wanted to make the members aware, besides the housing of your monies for the bank, until you have the monies under your control, bonding is not, of those monies is not available to this commission. So if the state holds the money, you can't bond them. You have to have the physical control. So I just throw that out. In addition to the banking services, that is something you ought to consider also.
Thank you for the clarification. Mr. Joanno, please.
Mr. Chairman, just a question, I guess, on an ethical point. If I'm a member of an advisory board of a bank, can I vote on this?
Mr. Nglima?
We'd have to look at that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll certainly get you the right information on that, sir. Yes, Mr. Frame?
It was the same question. I sit on the corporate board of the bank that may or may not respond to this. Should we abstain?
Mayor, my decision now is just based on my brief knowledge of your board, but I don't believe you're involved in any policy-making decision authority for that bank. I'll have to go back, look at the conflict of interest laws, and then come back with a definitive decision.
No, I sit on the corporate board.
Okay, well, I don't know enough about what that board does. I'd have to know more about that.
Thank you. Mr. Joanno?
Mr. Chairman, just advice to the attorney, there's a difference between an advisory board and a corporate board. You know that, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson, did you want to say something?
My question was basically the same because we're doing an RFP approval to form today. So I think the question was on this particular item.
You're just soliciting banks. You're not making a
Correct.
decision on which bank to choose
Correct.
and who should be able to vote on the bank. But if the question is, can you vote on the RFP? Yes, you can vote on the RFP.
I understood the question to be on this particular item today.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I did not understand that was the question. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Is there any further questions for Mr. Wagner before I ask Mr. Wagner for a motion? Mr. Wagner, sir.
I would move that we advertise this RFP to provide for banking services at Hrtac.
Mr. Hunt?
I'll second that.
Thank you for seconding it. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Thank you so much.
And Mr. Chairman, I would ask one more thing in the consideration of our lawyer as we move forward. As a concern, knowing the thresholds that's required to get an affirmative vote, that is 2/3 of the members and 2/3 of the population, that given, and again, I don't know the makeup of who's on what boards or board of directors, but I don't know if that will impact our ability to actually select a bank or not, but I'll ask the attorney to consider that so that everybody's aware of it here and get back to me with an answer. Once an answer is given to me, then hopefully I'll be able to disseminate that information to every member of Hrtac, and they'll understand if we have a dilemma here or not in terms of awarding the contract and who might get that. So with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, Mr. Price.
I would also, if he would evaluate the Finance Committee, who is going to be recommending the decision. So the committee also, I think, would need to be evaluated.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you so much, everybody. Next is for your information. You'll see the letters, A, B, A, Hrtac administrative items, B, Hampton Roads Transportation Fund, the monthly financial report is included. Expanding HRTPL metropolitan area to include Franklin and Southampton. It's my understanding a meeting will be set up hopefully with Franklin and Southampton. Is that correct, Dr. Robinbach? Yes. Thank you. And then we have the staff research as it relates to Marshall case that was asked about at the last meeting, as it relates to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. And of course, is the Hrtac guidebook. Is there any unfinished or new business at this time? Hearing none, please note that first of all, I want to thank all the membership here today. Your sense of urgency should be commended in wanting to move all these projects forward. I thank you so much. Indeed, this is today a bright spot, and I want to thank Senator Wagner, Delegate Jones, as well as all the other membership here for continuing moving forward with this Hrtac. The next Hrtac regular meeting is Thursday, October 16, 2014. Do we need a motion on that? No, we do not. That's a regular meeting at 12:30. I understand the Hrtac Bylaws Committee has a meeting set up at this time around October 17th. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. With that being said, a motion is now in order to adjourn. Thank you. We have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Have a great evening.